right, good morning, learners. Please settle down. Okay, so I know you're 1 week into your exam. I hope it's going well. So you're writing paper 1 on Thursday. So guys, we've done all the preparation for paper 1. I just want you to please go through the notes for poetry and the adverts, cartoon, question 5. You know you have everything with you. So please just revise. And you know there's no better preparation than going through past papers. So please, but just look at generic answers and remember this. Whenever you give a generic answer, you always give evidence. Your comprehension counts for 30 marks. If they ask, why is a rhetorical question used? You're going to say it's going to involve the reader, but you must relate it to what your topic is about. So remember, very often, if you're getting 1 mark out of 2, then it's going to be 50% at the end. So paper 1, you are prepared for paper 1. Please just go through your notes. All right. So my plan is to focus on paper 2. Paper 2 is the paper you can actually really prepare and do well in. Paper 3 is going to be your highest mark. Paper 1 would probably be your lowest mark. Right? So please prepare as much as possible for your paper 1, but we've done whatever we can to prepare you for paper 1. So what I've noticed is, with most schools, they're going to tell you to study the first 6 poems. So my plan is to revise the 6 poems. Remember, that's going to count. Your poetry is going to be 20 marks for your 2 prescribed poems and 10 marks for the unseen poems. So 30 marks for your poetry section. But today I want to talk a bit about, it's not in your notes. But before we start, I just want to speak about the unseen poem. Now, when you get an unseen poem, remember, it's not going to be a poem that you can't relate to at all. So the first thing, there's a few things that I want you to consider. Now, this is not in your notes, but as I was walking around, I thought perhaps I should just remind you of a few things. You probably know this, but just a reminder. When you read your poem, the first thing I want you to do is, if they give you a title, I want you to consider that title, and as you read the poem, I want you to decide, is it a literal or figurative meaning? Look at your poet. Is it a female? If it's a female, is it relating to some gender issues? If it's a male, or if it's an African person, someone from Africa, could it be relating to colonialism or apartheid? Do you understand? If it's someone, so look at a title. Look at the poet. And then when you're reading the poem, I want you to consider, is it a literal interpretation or is it figurative? And usually, where will we get the meaning of the poem? In that last stanza, right? So when it comes to unseen poem, an unseen poem is an easy poem. You're going to apply everything that you know for poetry with that. But unseen is usually an easy poem. Then I want to speak about your poetry essay question. You know question 1 is going to be your poetry essay question. Learners, please listen to me when I say this. So in my school, we're already done with paper 2, and I'm busy marking paper 2. And the learners who answered the poetry essay question actually performed better. Poetry essay question versus the others. Learners just don't like writing essays. So you just decide, I'm not even going to look at the essay question. Please don't do that. When we speak to moderators of the matric exam, even they would tell you that learners who answer the poetry essay question perform quite well. So remember, with the poetry essay question, it must still have paragraphs. And the big mistake that most learners make is that you do not quote diction. Remember, it's going to be about diction, tone, imagery. So you have to quote words that you're explaining. Some of them just speak, and you get a topic. If they are speaking about apartheid laws, for example, you can't just give me a summary of the poem. Everything that you say, the diction that you remove, that you discuss, has to be based on your topics. So there's 2 things that you don't do. You don't use the diction, you don't quote words and explain it. And the second thing that you do is you just give a general idea of what the poem is about. You do not focus on the question. So remember, every line you write, bear in mind what your question is. If you can do that, you're going to do well for your poetry essay question. And unseen poem is an easy poem, usually. It's a very simple poem. Look at that. Read it. Don't just read it once. You have to read it a few times together. Is it literal? Is it figurative? What are they trying to tell us? And read, especially that last stanza. Read it twice, at least, to get an idea. All right? So today we're going to focus on the first 3 poems. And next week we'll focus on the other 3 poems, but I think next week I'm going to touch on a few other aspects as well, just so that you're prepared for the paper. All right, so let's go through this. Now what I did here is, if you look at Sonnet 130, I'm extracting the important bits of information, like the must-know information. So what we're doing today is almost like a study session, because I think that's what learners like. You like your teacher to study with you, than doing it on your own, right? Or not? Okay, so Sonnet 130. First of all, the structure of this poem. Now, Sonnet 130, you know you've been doing this from grade 11, right? They've tested you on this poem several times, so I'm not sure. I really don't think that you'll be tested on it again, but let's go through it anyway. It's a traditional English love sonnet, and the poetic devices. So remember, when you see Sonnet 130, I want you to take note of, you're going to find alliteration, and you're going to find assonance. The repetition of the W sound in lines 3 and 4, and the repetition of the 11, of line 11, the G sound, are examples of the alliteration. And then you'll also notice in this poem you have repetition. It occurs in line 2, where red is repeated, and in line 4, where wires is repeated. Now, anytime we repeat something, why do we repeat something? To emphasize, right? So you're going to tell me what it emphasizes. So if you get a poem, an unseen poem, for example, if a word is repeated, think about colors. Colors are very significant, right? If we think about golden, rich, warmth, do you understand? Dull colors, what are they trying to tell us? Green symbolizes youth. So if there's any color mentioned in your unseen poem, for example, consider these things. Don't just study things in isolation. When we're studying and we're discussing color, it's also going to be relevant for your unseen poem as well. So repetition, the importance of color, texture. You know that in patriarchal poems, so here, Shakespeare versus the patriarchal poems, where they are talking about this perfect woman with blood-red lips, golden, luscious hair, a perfect person. Does such a person exist? No, every one of us are flawed, some more than others. Then we have the anastrophe. What is an anastrophe? Anastrophe, please highlight, natural order of words are reversed. So this is just to refresh your memory on important parts, right? Anastrophe. Like, let's look at the anastrophe. But no such roses I see in her cheeks. We know that's not the natural order of words. So when we alter the natural order of words, we call it an anastrophe. And definitely this poem is full of hyperbole. So highlight the word hyperbole. We know that he constantly exaggerates. Patriarchal poets, they exaggerate the beauty of the person. So we know that hyperbole we see it constantly. So if your teacher called it hyperbole, which I saw some of you smile about, you know it's hyperbole. The poet is not being cynical. He's not being cynical here. He's being realistic. He's being realistic because we know that no perfect person exists, right? So please highlight not cynical. Because if you write cynical, he sounds like he's very cynical, but it's not cynical. It's being realistic. And then what are we going to call the first 8 lines where he talks about, he refers to anti-compliments, right? So in patriarchal poems, we'll have all these compliments, but here we have anti-compliments. And guys, please take note that the tone of the quatrains is sarcastic. Please highlight. And another mistake that I've noticed many learners make, you learn one tone. You'll say, if they ask you, discuss the tone in Sonnet 130, then you just tell me the tone is sarcastic. That is not true, because only the first part of the poem, the quatrains, are sarcastic, while the rhyming couplet is very sincere. Unless there's a doctor in this venue, all cell phones should be switched off, guys. All right, so he's not cynical, but he's realistic. And we know the tone, so please highlight. I want you to remember, you should actually mark certain poems with an asterisk if you know there's two tones, so that you remember that you must mention two tones. So this poem definitely has two tones. So mark it with an asterisk so you remember. Right? So the first, in the quatrains, we have a very sarcastic tone. But in the couplet, the rhyming couplet, where the message of the poem is, it actually becomes very sincere. And what do we call, when we go to the rhyming couplet, do we see a change? Yes. Obviously, if the rest was sarcastic and then he suddenly becomes sincere, what do we call that change in poetry? The volta. Highlight volta. The volta. And you have to know what every theme in every poem is. So in this poem, the theme is about realistic love versus unrealistic, exaggerated descriptions of women as were seen in those traditional patriarchal poems. All right. So what I would also want you to do, now when you get themes, you know you get many themes. If you can understand your themes very well, and you must be able to relate diction to each of those themes, you would be able to answer any poetry question. Because your poetry question, remember the themes are the central message of that poem, right? So if you can get a few words to relate to each of your themes, remember some poems contain 4 or 5 themes. So if you can get a few, when you're making your notes and doing your summaries, write down a few words, the diction, that you can understand and relate it to that. That's probably going to be your poetry essay question. Right, and then I'm going to just remind you of a few things. With structure and tone, we know the quatrains, and there's a rhyming couplet. The couplet is about sincere love, while the quatrains are sardonic, frank, sarcastic. Now, learners, if they ask you about structure of this poem, you must also mention, while you're discussing structure, also mention there's a change in tone of the quatrains versus the couplet. We discussed this. So when we're talking about sincere versus cynical, we are saying that he's not cynical, he's sincere. And in these poems, do they talk about men? No. So we are saying that like men have flaws, women too would have flaws. There is no such thing as being perfect. When you think about this poem, you are going to think about being realistic. These are exaggerations. All of us have shortcomings. So in this poem, who is Shakespeare actually ridiculing? Who is he making fun of? Is he making fun of his lover? No. Is he making fun of women? No. He is actually making fun of the patriarchal poets who have this unrealistic view of who women are. So he's actually criticizing them. And let's look at this line. My mistress, when she treads the ground. What is meant by treads? Now, patriarchal poets, they would almost describe their woman as gliding, floating. So he says, but the person I love, she's real. She doesn't float above the ground, she walks. Now, but when we're saying treading, we are saying it's described as a heavy walk, not just this gentle, feminine kind of walk. Now this I want to show you, so please listen carefully. Refer to line 12. Comment on the effect of pace has on the meaning of the poem. Now, when you get your questions, guys, I also like you to have a highlighter. Which 2 words are important in this question? Comment on the effect of pace and the meaning of the poem. Which 2 words are important here? Pace and meaning. So when you answer your poem or your question, you must refer to the pace. What is pace? How fast we are reading something. And does it affect the meaning of the poem? Yes, it does. So listen carefully to how I read. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. Did you notice that I don't read it like my mistress when she walks treads on the ground? I don't read it as in one sentence. Those commas force me to pause. So please take note, the pace, you have to mention, the pace is slowed down. It forces us to slow down with the commas. And it's very monosyllabic. What is monosyllabic? Like single syllables. My mistress. When she walks. Can you see? Single syllables. So it creates this idea of, it's forcing us to slow down. It's almost showing us how heavy her steps are. Because if you're walking like this, you are also going to be slower. Do you understand? So when my pace is slow, it forces me to read it slower, but this image that I'm getting in my mind is that this woman, the way she walks, is very slow and very deliberate. It's not just gliding through the air. Now, can you see how the questions are going to be phrased? So your answers, guys, please, you know you have to write longer answers. They want you to give detailed descriptions. Very often, your answer sounds like it's 100% correct, but they're saying that you are not articulating your answer well. So we cannot give you the full 3 marks. So you rather write a longer answer. I mark paper 1, right? Now when we're marking, and I just want you to think about human nature. If I get a script, and I see that a learner wrote 2 lines, right? I read it, I mark it wrong. But just think about it logically. Then you have another child. For a 3-mark question, they wrote 3/4 of a page. And I gave this child 1 mark. Do you know how often I find myself second-guessing myself? And I go back and I read in case I missed a mark somewhere. Do you understand? So what I'm saying is, if you write a shorter answer, people assume that you know very little. So you write a longer answer. Sometimes you just need to explain something better. 3 marks, there's a big difference between getting 1 out of 3 and 3 out of 3. 1 out of 3 is 33 and a third percent. If you're going to get that for each question, you're going to fail the paper. So bear that in mind. Show how the last line completes his argument. He doesn't want to exaggerate anything. He doesn't want to make false or untrue statements. All right, look at this one. This is an interesting question. They tell you to discuss 3 sensory images. What are sensory? Comes from which word? Senses. So here we're discussing 4. Sight. When he describes her, does he tell us, can we picture what she looks like? Yes. So he talks about sight. He talks about her features. Touch. He talks about her wiry hair. So you can actually get this idea when he touches her hair, what her hair would feel like. Smell. You remember he said her breath reeks. Now reeks is, we're not even saying that her breath smells unpleasant. We are saying it's disgusting, it's horrible, right? So smell, another sense, and hearing. You remember he also talks about, he says her voice. Her voice doesn't sound, I'd rather listen to music, right? So yeah, we know he's being very harsh with what he says. But think about it rationally. Many of us don't exactly have voices of angels, right? I know I'm one of them. I sound terrible and I get criticized all the time, right? So it relates to the theme of imperfections. But guys, even if people criticize you, if there is something that makes you happy, if you are playing a song and it makes you happy to sing along, you must just do what makes you happy. Stop always being worried about what other people think of you. Please, guys, this is advice. I've learned you must not, there's a place and time to bother about the opinions of others, like in an interview, for example. In an interview, I'm going to say whatever I know they want me to say, right? There, it's not for me to showcase how brave and whatever I am. There, I'm going to say exactly what I need to say. But generally in life, stop being dictated by what others think of you, right? Be true to yourself. Okay. Now here, okay guys, this is not a psychiatric session or psychologist session, but I just felt like I needed to tell you that. Right, tone. Identify the tone. I told you whenever we mention a question on tone, what are you going to talk about? If there is a shift in tone, right? Remember, so here we know the tone in the first 12 lines, it's sarcastic, but the last 2 lines, sincere. So always, and I don't want you to just say lines 1 to 12, sarcastic, the last 2 lines, sincere. I want you to say, there is, so you're going to say what the first 12 lines, and then you're going to say, there is a clear shift, and then you say what the shift is in the next line. By heavens. If I refer to heaven, I'm bringing God into the scenario. So he swears by God, and that's why it becomes so sincere. Now, guys, with all this information that I shared with you, right, and you'll see there's even that essay question that's there. I am sure, I am 100% certain, if you get a question, if you get sonnet 130, you shouldn't think twice, you should answer this question. You've been doing it since grade 11. I'm sure you've been tested on this poem, right? So, you are quite confident. Now, this poem, The Boy Was Shot Dead, right, at Nyanga. Please, what type of a poem? Is it colonial or apartheid? Apartheid. We know this, right? This is a simple poem. Let's look at structure. The poem consists of 4 stanzas. And it ends, I want you to highlight this because I think you probably forgot this. It ends with a 1-line coda. What is a coda? A final thought. Your final thought, a reflective element. So usually, your coda is going to be your concluding statement. It's going to come at the end without a pause. And I can't see them asking you this poem without referring to the coda, because that's the whole idea of this poem, right? Without a pause. The first 3 stanzas contain 5 lines each. That's not really important. Please take note, third-person narrative. So it's said from the outside looking in. Now, if they ask you something about structure, we know it's a free verse. Free verse means what? If I told you this poem is written in free verse, what am I actually saying? In essence, what am I saying? I'm saying that there's no prescriptions. There is no set order. So what we're going to notice is that the poet wants to highlight freedom. Even in the structure, the way he writes the poem, there's no restrictions. So here he's emphasizing, because this poem is about freedom as well. So free verse, no restrictions. What are the main poetic devices that we see in this poem? First of all, it is paradox. Why do I say paradox? What is a paradox? Remind me. A contradiction, right? Now, I say the child who was shot dead. So we know the child is dead. And then I say the child is not dead. Do you see the contradiction, right? Then the irony, without a pause. Why am I saying that it's ironic, that line? Okay, so first of all, that paradox, when I say the child is not dead, but I'm going to discuss it in the question, so we're going to be fine. The irony without a pause. It's only when the child is dead that he can freely go wherever he wants to without a pause. Right? That's what the irony is. Metaphors, there are several. So if you look at the lines, you must know that this poem, there are several metaphors. So when they ask you to identify the figure of speech, just check, there are several of those. Anaphora. Please highlight the anaphora. It's repeated, the child. Throughout this poem, they say, the child. Why do you think they do that? You know, there's a big difference between a child and an adult. If I had to have this poem and I wrote about an adult, would you feel as sympathetic if it was an adult? No. We feel more sympathetic because it's an innocent child, right? So I'm constantly repeating it because I want to reinforce this idea. Don't forget, this was an innocent child. What was done to this child was uncalled for. And then, in this poem, please, if they mention anything about mother or father, you are going to mention the generational gap. And what's the whole point of mentioning this generational gap? Now, you know, with virtually every generation, would you say that you have a generational gap between your parents? Yes, I had a generational gap with my parents. It is something that happens through every generation. At your point where you are right now, you think you know everything and your parents just don't understand, right? And your parents will have an absolute different view on that. Do you understand? So here, generational gap. But in this poem specifically, the children felt like their parents were too submissive. They did not actually do anything. They were passive. So please take note. They felt like the parents were passive, while the younger generation want to take an active role to fight against the unfair the unjust system. Right, synecdoche. This is important. What is a synecdoche? Remind me. Where something represents a whole. So if I wanted a symbol from you to represent Christianity, which symbol would you give me? A cross. Do you understand? That cross would symbolize Christianity, so it becomes a synecdoche. So here, the child represents not just himself, represents the youth at large. So the synecdoche, the child represents the youth. And then allusion. When I say it's alluding to something else, that means I'm saying something, but I'm not being overt about it. I'm not being direct. You have to figure out the meaning. So the allusion, when he says, the child is not dead, I want you to remember biblical reference. In the Bible, it says, you remember when Jesus raised the child from the dead, right? So this has biblical allusion. And always remember, this is a protest poem during apartheid. But this youngster, this young child, becomes a symbol of a growing sense of freedom. People are tired of being restricted the whole time. They want their freedom and they want it urgently. What is the tone? Please take note. Your tone is unrelenting, bold, determined. Do not give up. And what is our theme? The brutality of the apartheid system and innocent lives that were lost. So remember now, if you have to get a poetry essay question on this, there's no way where they cannot speak about apartheid or apartheid laws or something like that. And if they do, remember, if we're talking about without a pass, for example, you know, there were pass laws, right? So you are going to, whatever your poetry essay question is, every word that you write must relate, because this is what we do when we mark. If you write, and many learners, they can write 2 or 3 pages and they're so content with themselves. And when we're marking, all we do is we block areas and we say irrelevant, does not answer question. We put a question mark because you are not speaking to the question. You are just writing a general summary. You cannot do that. Right, let's quickly go through this. The fact that he's a child, it evokes a sympathetic response because we know children are vulnerable. We are supposed to be protecting them, not killing a child. And then the title refers to dead child, yet in line 1 it says the child is not dead. The child, why is the child not dead? You cannot be dead because you become a symbol. A symbol remains even after the person has died. So the child becomes a symbol of innocence, hope, and resistance. And the child will be remembered through history. The repetition of the child, remember we spoke about this, the mother and father. Here you're going to speak about parents who are submissive, while the youth, they want a violent solution. They believe that violence is the only answer. Their parents used the passive approach and nothing happened. And also you're going to speak about the rage that's built up in the youth. Diction, here it's just the difference between mothers and fathers. With the mother, we're talking about this emotional idea, this pain she feels at the loss of her child. The father, a sense of warrior pride. So please highlight that. Many learners forget about this. The father, it's a sense of this warrior pride. He feels like, you know, in society, men feel like they're all powerful, they can do everything. They're not allowed to cry. But just for your information, you know the suicide rate in men is higher than women, right? Just information. Comment on the effect of the denials in the 3rd stanza. Maybe men should be more in touch with their emotions and they won't kill themselves. Okay, but now let's talk about denials. The frequent use of denials. If someone accuses me of something, right? And if I say, I did not do this once, I don't care if you believe me or not because I know I'm innocent. But you know the line, the lady doth protest too much? It's from Shakespeare. The lady doth protest too much. When you know you are guilty, you want to oversell this. And then we actually see your guilt by you trying to overemphasize how innocent you are. So the constant denials about the fact that they were not involved in the killing. Remember, here we also think about Steve Biko. When he was killed, they gave us a whole list of reasons why he died, and we realized that all of those were not true. Imagery. The imagery comes from the word image. What pictures do we get in our mind? So we get the one picture of the sun. The sun, carefree mood, suggests this child is free, no restrictions. And then the other image, we see the child is described as a giant. Why am I describing a child as a giant? Because of this potential in this child. Remember, this child became the symbol that's spreading to everyone else. This child becomes a giant, like a larger-than-life figure, because he's able to get us to do certain things. The effectiveness of the last line, remember, without a past, the coda, it's poignant. Poignant, what does the word poignant mean? It's powerful, right? There's no restrictions. And that is exactly what adults wanted. Okay, this is not important. The child is repeated 10 times in this poem. So I don't even know if you realize that, but 10 times it's repeated. It's trying to emphasize that the child's age, innocence, and during this time, there were several young children that died and that their deaths were uncalled for. It was totally unacceptable. Right, let's go to our last poem, At a Funeral. Now, when you think of At a Funeral, this is the one poem you have to know the person's name. Who is the person that we're talking about? Whose funeral is it? Valencia Majambozi, right? What occupation? Doctor. So, in this poem, we focus on disappointment of unfulfilled dreams. Could she actually get to the point that she wanted to? Could she reach her full potential? She wanted to help people. Therefore, she becomes a doctor. She could have got her family out of the situation, but she couldn't. So her full potential was not reached because just after she qualifies, she serves an internship, and she's about to practice as a doctor. She is killed in one of those marches. And what we're talking about, the funeral, when you're talking about the funeral, you must mention everything was just for show. It was nothing more than just the show where they have to think about, even in South Africa, if a prominent figure dies, a politician or some famous person, did you notice how that funeral becomes a political show, right? Especially if it's close to election time, right? So here, that's what they're talking about. With this funeral, it's just for show. And please look at that last bullet. The formal procedures and customs. It's aligned to the formality of this poem. Everything is just this idea of a show. Everything is formal, restricted, but it's pointless because she is dead. All this is just for show. It's meaningless. So this poem is also quite a simple poem, right? So remember, this poem, is it apartheid or colonial? Apartheid, right? So both the poems that we did, The Boy Was Shot Dead and At a Funeral. Personification, we have personification in this poem. The graves are personified. It's as if these graves are so hungry, they want more youth. And here, I don't know if you remember that picture of death. Remember, we picture death as the Grim Reaper, you know, wearing that cloak with the skeet in the hand. There's exclamation points. Learners, I told you this several times, but I feel you forget this. After salute and arise, there's exclamation points. If an exclamation mark is used in poetry, please mention it in your answer. Don't forget to mention it. And why are they used here? Because they want to show us it's a call to action. We want you to act immediately. We can't let this go on. Arise, he concludes by saying, choosing death is preferable to submitting. So remember, please, this is his final thought, where he says, I would rather die than kneel down. So he says, I would rather die, I'm not going to submit to them. I would rather die than submit to this unfair, unjust society. And then there's a pun in this poem, plots. If I say a plot, it could be a piece of land, but it could also be plotting and scheming. So remember, the word plot will have, it's a pun. The tone in this poem is defiance. They are totally defiant of the current, at that time, the current apartheid system. And the theme again is defiance, oppression. It's very political, but it's a call to arms. We don't want you to sit back and do nothing. Action must be taken. All right. So this poem is also quite simple. Did you notice, like, the 3 poems that we went through? Would you say any of those poems were really difficult? No. Discuss the word pageantry. If this poem is tested, they have to ask you about pageantry, because pageantry refers to this whole idea of this show, the splendid scene. In the splendid scene, this funeral, what do you picture? There's flags, there's flowers, this very expensive casket. So it's all about the funeral is just for show. What do the words black, green, and gold refer to? I want you to look at these on 2 levels. On the political level, remember, was ANC the government at that time? No, it was the resistance group, right? So the ANC was not the governing party at that time. They were actually considered a terrorist group. So here, when you look at those colors, black, green, and gold, those are the colors of the ANC. They were actually fighting against, there were other groups as well, but the ANC was the most prominent group that was fighting against apartheid. So those colors, and then, so you're going to talk about a political level, and the second level is an educational level. So look at the educational level. When you graduate, next year you're going to go to university. After 3 years, or depends what you're going to study, when you go for your graduation, you're going to wear a black gown, and then they're going to put these other colors depending on your degree. So black, green, and gold, it refers to that garb that you wore, the gown that you wore when she graduates. So when we're talking about this, political level and educational level. The graves, they are expectant, they are waiting for the dead. It shows a loss of hope. And when we're speaking about hope, you're going to talk about the sense of her future, a sense of hopelessness because unfulfilled dreams, unfulfilled potential. Carrion books, I think they will definitely ask you about this because this is a really good question. When they talk about carrion books of birth, carrion books, carrion is dead meat. In Life of Pi, you know we talk about carrion meat, where where the animals eat on the dead meat. But here we're talking about pass books. Remember, black people were forced to carry a pass book wherever they went. And carrion, the meat, is dead. It's referring to, it felt as if their lives were dead and empty. But people were not actually dead, but it was dead-like because of the oppression. It felt like you were dead, although you were alive. Arise, salute. It's a commanding tone. I'm not asking you, I'm not pleading with you, I'm telling you, arise, do something. Don't just sit back and accept your situation. And it's a tone of defiance. The word ponder, the poet wants us to think about the implications of everything that happened at the funeral. Okay, then here there's a difference between death and death's head. Death is personified, right? But death, when we look at death, it's the skeleton with a cloak and the skeet. The skeet is used to end life. The pun, we spoke about this, about plot and a piece of land. The tone, I'm emphasizing again, it's a commanding, defiant tone. Right, let's discuss this for a second. Sorry. Discuss the effectiveness of this message or theme, right? First of all, we are mourning a specific individual, which is Valencia Majambozi, but it's also this concept of death. Why are we talking about death? Because her life, it was a wasted life because she was this person full of potential. But it amounted to nothing because her life was cut short. And because of this, what do they want us to do? They want us to be called to arms, to take action, resort to violence because something needs to be done. Now, guys, we are done with the 3 poems. I hope you understand these poems better, right? Just to revise it, to reinforce what we did earlier. Okay, so our thought for the week. Your opinion of me does not define who I am. All right, have a lovely week, everyone. I hope you have a good week. And